Okay, councillors, we'll open the meeting. It's 9:08. Really one word this morning. Queenslander. Sorry, Mick. Sorry. Not sorry. Okay.
Does anybody else self-identify with New South Wales, or is it just me?
No, just Mick. He's the only one who's game to. You know.
Item 1.
Or to quote Joey Johns.
Yeah, that was a good try.
All right, so councillors, attendance and apologies. So we've got 2 apologies this morning. One from council. Can we move them collectively? Okay. The apologies for Councillor Gates and Councillor Hamill be received and accepted. Seconded by Councillor Peter Young. All in favour? Against? Carried. We also welcome Councillor Barden-Lumsden, who's visiting, and Councillor Taylor Jr., who's visiting also. I just came up with that now. It's pretty good, actually. Okay. But if you need to leave, I'd still prefer it if you asked.
Oh, I will. I will.
All right. Confirmation of minutes, councillors. Someone like to move the minutes? Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Now, conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Vorster, did I see some?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this relates to item 6.3, Station Neighbourhood Concept Plans, Community Engagement Outcomes and Updated Concept Plans. When this item was considered originally, I brought the meeting's attention to the fact that someone may perceive that I have an interest in the decision, given that I have a friend who lives in one of the identified precincts in the neighbourhood planning exercise, a friend and electoral donor, and also a friend through my wife. My recollection at the time was that those declarations were not made at committee or council. I merely brought it to the meeting's attention in case procedurally one of my colleagues wished to deal with it differently. I did check the minutes of that relevant meeting and saw that no DCOI was recorded, so I'm satisfied that I'd ventilated it, but there were no issues raised by my colleagues. Given that this takes us one step further in progressing plans, I thought I'd take a fresh opportunity to bring the meeting's attention to the fact that I have a friend who lives along the corridor at Knobby Beach, friend and electoral donor at Miami, and friends with a development site in around Knobby Beach. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I do have some DCIs prepared in case there's an issue. Otherwise, given that this matter stands to affect a significant number of people in the local government area, I'm relying on the fact that an exemption applies. So, don't propose to
when you say an exemption applies, you still want us to make the decision?
No.
Make our decision?
No. So when we first considered this,
yes,
I didn't make a DCOI.
Yes.
What I did was I brought these facts to the attention of the meeting in case any of our colleagues wished to compel that through a procedural motion. I'm taking the step of doing it again.
Yeah, but we will now have to resolve...
If I make the DCOI. So while these 3 DCOIs appear on the agenda, I did not ask for them to appear on the agenda. I merely forwarded on some pro forma forms to the city solicitor asking for advice.
Right.
I haven't received that advice from the city solicitor, but they've appeared on the agenda. So I'm not proposing to make the declarations.
Okay.
For the reasons that
why don't we then, rather than having you make the declarations pursuant to whatever section it is, why don't we ask that these tables of details be included in the minutes so that they're recorded as you having advised the meeting of those matters?
I totally support what you're saying in order to document our contemplation. I just don't feel as though these tables in their current format represent the ventilation of issues, because they actually would appear to someone reading that I am making a declaration or feel that I need to.
Okay. So you're happy to, if we decide, if everyone says that, well, there's no need to talk about this, that you just rely on the tape?
Yes.
Okay.
And that we all rely on the tape, because of course we all have an
that's
obligation.
fine. This came up recently where we talked about whether there should be a different mechanism for having this captured for visibility afterwards. But if you're comfortable with that, anyone else think that Councillor Vorster should take further action in relation to formalising the declarations? No. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. We'll move on to item 6.1, 2 and 4 are all starred items. Did anyone want to unstar any of those? Yep. And I'll unstar 6.2. Councillor Hamill's not here, but he has an interest in that matter, so I'm going to ask some questions on his behalf. So we'll unstar 6.2 and 4 just for a couple of questions. Someone like to move 6.1? Moved by Councillor Pauline Young, seconded by Councillor Owen Jones. Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, we'll go to 6.2. Yeah. Yeah. So, councillors, everyone's probably read this matter. Did you need a presentation? Are you happy for me to just ask a couple of questions? Presentation? Yeah. Do you want to shoot through a quick preso?
So through the chair, this presentation is regarding... Oh yeah, this one, yeah. Through the chair, sorry, this presentation is regarding an impact assessable application at 1 Dalma Street in Ormo Hills, where the applicant is seeking to establish a service station with ancillary shop and food and drink outlet and a food and drink outlet. The subject site is 3,087 square metres in size and includes a 52 metre frontage to Tilly Rowan Road and a 36 metre frontage to Dalma Street. The site is identified within the emerging community zone. The proposed development includes a single-storey built form with a total height of 6.1 metres. The proposal includes a landscaping buffer around the perimeter of the site, a total of 8 refuelling stations and 20 on-site car parking spaces. The food and drink outlet includes a drive-through facility. The service station seeks to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the food and drink outlet seeks to operate from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week. Following site-specific investigations, the subject site was identified on the Ormo Hills conceptual land use map as a business area for fringe business. As such, future development intent within the subject site is guided by the GLUM. The city plan therefore intends for the subject site to be developed for a commercial purpose consistent with the mixed-use fringe business precinct zone. The subject site is adjacent to existing sensitive receivers to the west. Therefore, officers have ensured the built form provides appropriate amenity protection measures. With regards to the built form, the development provides a minimum setback of 11 metres from the western boundary, which is supported by a 6 to 7.5 metre wide landscaping buffer. In terms of noise, attenuation measures include a 2.4 metre high acoustic fence along the northern and western boundaries, as well as operational restrictions for hours of refuge collection and programming associated with tyre deflators. Despite the requested hours of operation by the applicant, officers have recommended conditions to restrict the service station to operate between 5 a.m. and midnight, 7 days a week, and the food and drink outlet being 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. With regard to lighting, officers have recommended specific conditions that requires lighting to be provided in accordance with the Australian Standard for Environmental Zone 2, which is the standard for semi-rural lighting, to reduce any potential amenity impacts. The recommended conditions in regards to hours of operation and lighting address concerns raised by submitters. Officers have considered the additional traffic demand generated by the proposed development and determined that the applicant must complete upgrades to the existing intersection at Dalma Street and Tilly Rowan Road. The required upgrades allow for motorists to cross the northbound lane and to temporarily stop within the centre aisle before proceeding to cross into the southbound lane. This is referred to as a two-stage right turn and is found throughout the city. The required upgrades assist in alleviating a known traffic issue which addresses submitter concerns. On the 21st of February this year, under delegated authority, officers approved a development application for material change of use, code accessible, for a service station at 3 to 7 Tilly Rowan Road at Ormo Hills. The subject site is 36 metres south of the approved service station development. Within the assessment of the application, officers have considered the potential cumulative impacts of both uses operating, including noise and odour. The establishment of both uses within proximity of each other is considered commercial risk rather than inconsistency with the city plan. A total of 58 submissions were received objecting to the proposed development, including 53 properly made submissions. This includes a 45 signature petition and 5 not properly made submissions. Submitters raised concern with the potential traffic impacts, the amenity impacts, the lack of economic need, the impact of safety on the immediate neighbourhood, conflict with the city plan, and the impact on housing prices. The matters raised by submitters have been considered throughout the assessment of the application. Overall, officers have completed a detailed assessment against the city plan as a whole, specifically the clumb intentions for the subject site, to determine that through recommended conditions, the proposed development is appropriate for the subject site and is recommended for approval. Are there any questions?
Okay, Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Chair. The already approved service station up the road, does it have a cafe or convenience store attached as well? Do you know?
Through the chair, it does have an ancillary sort of convenience store associated with it. It's a 7-Eleven development.
Okay. Just one more question. This application, are they wanting, I know they've gone for a 24-hour and we've conditioned against that, but was that because they wanted something like a fast food store that would operate through 24 hours or just for the service station component?
Through the chair, just the service station component. Throughout the development application, the applicant was supportive of restricting the hours of operation for the food and drink outlet component.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vorster, then Councillor Petition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few questions. Could we turn to page 274, I think it is?
Is that one of those fold-out pages?
No, it's not, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about this. It's at Macready Road, which seems to come to a dead end. I just wanted a sense from city officers what the ultimate end of that road might look like and where it might terminate to, because I've got no visibility of who might own that lot 3RP 883725. So could you just walk me through what we imagine that road might look like, just so I've got a better understanding of what the ultimate road network might look like?
Yep. So through the chair, we expect that the Macready Road will punch through straight to Ormo Ridge Road in the future. We have been discussing a future application with the current landowner.
So the landowner of that vacant block?
Correct.
And what's the nature of it? Is that residential?
Through the chair, yes. The proposal is for a residential subdivision. in the future.
Okay, and in thinking about how that road might punch through, and I suppose I'm asking this because I've got no visibility of this earlier development, but this orange hatcheted area, which is this 7-Eleven development, would they propose to connect to that road at the back, or was their development application supported solely on the basis that they've got a frontage along that Ormo Ridge Road and Tilly Roan Road?
Through the chair, yeah, the 7-Eleven development proposed ingress and egress in proximity to the intersection of Ormo Ridge and Tilly Roan Road. It does not provide access to the future Macready Road connection.
And just so I can understand what amenity concerns might unfold or issues might emerge, could you walk me through any differences that exist between the development conditions attached to the 7-Eleven development and the development that we're considering today in terms of operating hours, setbacks, vegetated buffer and all that?
Yeah, so through the chair, your first question is about hours of operation.
Yes.
We imposed similar conditions on the 7-Eleven to restrict from 5 a.m. to midnight. The applicant did appeal the decision there and was afforded 24-hour operating rights through the appeal process.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question. What about vegetation buffer?
The proposed development includes a 2.5 metre vegetation buffer along the western boundary compared to the current development, which provides a 6 to 7.5 metre buffer.
So my question is, to what...
So just repeat that.
Yeah.
The 7-Eleven one has 2.5 metres. This one has 6.
Correct.
Actually, it's 7.5 in most parts on the western boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I kind of get that if that Macready Road is anticipated to punch through. It's not as though you've got homes backing against the development, but I wanted to ask that question because I think when we attach conditions, they've got to be reasonable. And if there's precedent 36 metres away, I think we expose ourselves a little bit in that we might think we're securing a good outcome for the community, but they might not ultimately be enforceable because, you know, this applicant can point to the 7-Eleven. Could I just try and understand how these 3 lots, which I take to have been an amalgamation and the DA was lodged, how was that dealt with as a code assessable application, given I think the overlay shows these 3 housing lots outside of the fringe business zone?
So through the chair, there's the Clum overlay map for the subject site. Let me just bring that up for you again. So the top 3 lots, that is the 3 to 7 Tilly Roan Road,
Yes.
and that is not identified in the emerging community zone.
Yes.
Rather, it is identified in the mixed-use fringe business precinct, whereas the subject site is identified in the emerging communities but does have the Clum overlay map.
Same overlay, but different underlying
Yeah.
zoning,
Okay, sorry, I just need you to
which made that one code accessible and this one.
Yeah, I'm just sorry. I probably need it explained to me a little bit differently. Sorry. So when I look at that diagram, I look at the orange and black hatcheted area, right? And I look to the key and it says, this is the business area, fringe business. Okay? The 3 lots for this earlier development are not part of the fringe business zone, right? So what are they part of? They're part of that conceptual land use, whatever it is?
No.
Then what are they part of?
So the underlying zoning is mixed-use fringe business for those lots. That's why they're not identified on the Clum. It was already specifically
So the
identified with that
closest
zoning.
thing to explain it is
Yes.
that you can imagine the orange and black hatcheting continuing up to the intersection. But through a quirk of the fact that this is in an emerging community zone, it has become impact accessible by that, and the other one was code.
Okay.
So it's a code accessible use effectively on this street.
Yes.
But
All right. And I notice, I think city officers might have gone out to site based on some of those images, but this Tilly Roan Road, if I pronounce that right?
Tilly Roan.
Tilly Roan Road. What's the function of that road?
So through the chair, that's a higher order road and it acts as a service road to the motorway.
Service road. So I suppose my question is, you know, if I'm driving along the motorway and my fuel's running low, you know, I don't have the benefit of an electric vehicle, I'm thinking to myself, well, where can I drive to in order to refuel my vehicle? And if there are a number of service stations that are positioned close together, mentally I might make that my destination, because then I've got a reasonable shot of making it to this area and filling my vehicle. It becomes a destination for refueling. When city officers looked at the potential traffic impacts of this second service station, did they merely look at the impact of the service station, or did they consider that there might be more traffic induced to this precinct because it becomes an area known for having multiple service stations, if that makes sense?
Through the chair, I might bring up Chris Levers to discuss the traffic matters.
Oh, there's quick pass.
The heavy hitter.
Hey, would you mind, Emily, just changing the slide to an aerial of the slightly broader area? I'll just preface whatever Chris is going to say by saying that I think you'll find that the biggest take-up of use of this will actually be locals who are exiting the M1 on their way home and will grab some fuel here. And the alternative fuel site that's on the west, a little bit to the north of this shot, unfortunately, is in a very awkward position in terms of inducing traffic into what's effectively the overpass area. So, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, the traffic assessment assumed for the service station component 100 trips an hour. So that's 50 cars in, 50 cars out in an hour, which is based on standard trip generation rates. And the food and drink outlet component, which is a drive-through coffee, as I understand, which generates more traffic in the morning. That was an additional 100 trips in the morning peak hour and a lesser amount, 25 trips in the PM. So in the morning peak, the total is 200 trips an hour. In the afternoon, 125 trips an hour. And as part of the, I guess, the standard trip generation rates for service stations, the majority of the trip generation is taken to be drop-in trips, so already passing by the site. But there is a component that is assumed to be new trips or trips that are redirected through the area to visit the service station.
Okay, just two more very quick questions, Mr. Chairman. For me, when I think about a road that has multiple service stations, I begin thinking of Scottsdale Drive, for example. It seems as though every new development has got a childcare centre, a servo, and a physio, and a bit of retail, and either a GYG or a Starbucks. That seems to be every second DA that I see. And what I've found along Scottsdale Drive in particular is that, especially on these higher order roads, that there isn't a need to deliver footpaths in order to take cyclists and pedestrians off the road and make sure that people are navigating in a safe way as they attempt to traverse busy VXOs. Now, having a look at the aerials, it seems that there's no footpaths in the area. Right, so I'm looking at, again, that page 274. Do city officers have any sense around whether there are active travel movements around or along this road? Oh, so they're proposing a footpath. Okay, I didn't see that.
Through the chair, yeah, there is a condition for a trunk footpath of 2.5 metres long along the frontage of the site. Officers have considered the prior development at 3 to 7 Tilly Rowan Road and will have an active linkage along the whole frontage. A similar condition was imposed on that development.
All right, very encouraged to hear that. And just lastly on operating hours, I mean, the fact that we've gone to court over operating hours and there's a 24-hour 136 metres away makes me super, super concerned on behalf of the residents behind this new proposed one. Like, super, super concerned. Assuming that our conditions hold up, and they may be subject to appeal, but assuming they hold up, when we talk about operating hours, does that mean that all staff have to leave the site at a particular time, or that they just cease trading? Because I imagine that at the close of business there might still be cashing up, cleaning up and all that might be unfolding on the site outside of trading. So can you just give me an assurance that that those hours relate to activity on the site altogether.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the condition 9 has
Sorry.
the actual words for the,
Could you give me a page reference?
sorry, Councillor, 245.
245?
Yeah.
Bear with me. Condition 9.
Yes. So practically what happens here through the chair is that, for example, the service station would operate from, if these conditions became the conditions of approval, the service station would operate from 5 a.m. till midnight. So that means you could turn up in your car at 11:59, fill up, and you might go over by a few minutes, but the intent would be that the business would cease to operate at 12. There'd probably be a few 5-10 minutes after where staff are leaving, and that is how it would be practically enforced.
Is there a way of strengthening that condition so that all business activity on the site ceases after those hours? Because for me, I just think back working in retail. Shop would close. I might sometimes be there half an hour to 45 minutes later, catching up on all of the admin and day close work that I can't get to because the store was understaffed during the day. So is there a way to reasonably strengthen that condition to make sure that the operating hours are the operating hours?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the committee wanted to, they could amend Part 9A, as Councillor Vorster just said, so it said all activity associated with the service station is to cease.
Okay, thank you.
I guess as you know, the compliance area is sort of driven by complaints rather than sort of surveillance, I suppose. So if there were staff in there operating, tidying up the register or doing whatever, and it wasn't causing bother, then they would probably continue to do so. But,
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, I'm just sensitive to the fact we've got a lot of local submitters.
Sure.
Obviously interested in what happens in their neighbourhood, and I've no doubt that should this be approved, if they push the friendship, we would receive complaint, and I'd want to put city officers in the strongest possible place to compel a real-world outcome that mirrors the potential intent of the committee. So I think strengthening that language might actually assist with enforcement rather than making it subject of discretion and interpretation.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you.
Sorry. Councillor Peter Young, then Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Jeff. A question that arose from the discussion from Chris, if you don't mind a question through you to him, is about the trip generation rates for service stations. I wondered if there's a standard rate or if it depends on the number of fuel bowsers. If that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It does vary, and sorry, I don't have the rates in front of me, but it does take into account the size of the site from memory. So the larger the site of the service station, then the larger the trip generation.
Okay, thank you. So just coming back to the report, Chairman, on page 228, there's a discussion about offsets for the transport network, and I just want to understand what we're looking at here.
Green is creditable trunk work.
The footpath that's already constructed
No, it hasn't been constructed. That blue line that's on the screen now
is to be constructed.
is to be constructed, but will be creditable works. Is that right?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
So the value of that footpath is $34,560 according to council's.
Or 234 if we constructed it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I don't want the credited value to be higher necessarily, but I think
No.
we've got some really bad information behind all of this, whereby the city's charges resolution was made in 2019, and obviously construction rates have increased dramatically, but if you look at that, you know, it's $5,000 for establishment and $5,000 for traffic control. Well, that's not going to get a look in for any of our projects, and 95 metres of footpath for $20,000. Well, for us, it's about $1,000 a metre. So I just wonder about these rates as they apply to, you know, what the potential income might be. Whereas in this case, obviously, we're looking at what the benefit to the developer might be. So it doesn't concern me that much. But I think that's a fundamental thing we may need to look at. Just in regard to the conditions of approval, and obviously there's been discussion about the hours of operation, I wonder if it's reasonable for us to impose a condition that requires for any future change to the hours of approval, of operation, I mean, that there be an MCU type, like an open to public submissions application, rather than just a change that gets done through delegated authority or behind the scenes. Is that feasible for us to impose a condition that says any future change to the hours of operation has got to be open and public submissions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think it's needed to put that condition in because the Act would take care of that issue. If they did want to change the hours of operation later on, it wouldn't be a minor change. It would be what's called an other change, and because this was an impact assessable DA, that other change would also be impact assessable. So,
right. Oh, that gives me some comfort.
Yep.
Thanks, Jim.
And just a quick comment, if I could, on the value of those works. There will be a follow-up process. So if this developer chooses to go ahead and build it, there'll be, contracts done up between the city and the developer, and those rates will be sort of further worked out at that time to reasonably cover all the costs. So this is just an estimate of infrastructure charges and an estimate of the value it works at this MCU stage.
Thank you, Mick. Thanks, Jim.
So, councillors, I have... Oh, sorry, Councillor Taylor, you go next.
No, thank you.
My apologies.
Just want to touch in relation to time closure. If we did, I've seen conditions before personally where we have trading closing hours and then there's a period of time nominated for, in our case, guests, but patrons and staff to leave the particular site. So I don't know if that relates to different type of usages, but I have seen that used in properties as before.
Thanks, sir.
Coming back to transport, just looking at the Tillyrogan Road, is it? The turn, if you turned right into the new service station, is it been a evaluation of how many cars could potentially be in that turning right lane before they entered the actual site? The concern I have seen in many of these cases is it ends up causing a block of your main road as you're heading, potentially is that east or west?
So,
you get in the
Emily,
road.
do you want to just bring up the
this
slide that shows the new road configuration?
Yeah, of course.
And then we can talk to that one. Okay.
I'll get Chris to answer this one.
Okay.
Sorry, keep going, Darren, but that'll help.
So I'm just having a look at that to the right. So you literally turn
So
right.
you're turning right to enter the site. If you're heading south on Tillyrogan Road, you turn right into Dalma Street.
And you enter into that site. And then you can only exit. Perfect. That's clear. Thank you.
There you go. So, councillors, I have had a bugbear for some time now about the height of pylon signs that are used at petrol stations. Yes. So I've asked the officers to, since we've got the opportunity to deal with this one as an impact assessment, just bearing in mind that people, will be impacted potentially by the heights and lights of things on this site, that we include a new condition which limits the height of the pylon sign to be not higher than the canopy of the fuel station, which I think is fair. So we've got that worked up somewhere to add in. So just in relation to a couple of things that Councillor Hamill raised with me, which I was just going to, he's probably watching at home. If you're home, Councillor Hamill, we're missing you a lot. we miss your strawberries even more. Roger, just a couple of questions that Councillor Hamill's asked to flesh out. We didn't undertake a economic impact assessment. Can you just explain why that wasn't done, and if it was done, would it play a role in this particular zoning, for example?
Through you, Mr Chair, we didn't conduct an economic needs assessment as we considered it wasn't relevant nor reasonable. Economic needs assessments are usually carried out for two purposes. One, when a land use is not contemplated on a particular zone. As Emily's pointed out, this is subject to a clum in terms of the fringe business area. So we actually thought a service station is a business activity and contemplated. So in terms of the first test, it is a contemplated land use, so we don't seek economic needs assessment for that. And the other reason we seek economic needs assessment is if either scenario, it is contemplated or not, whether the development has an opportunity of causing blight on an area or an adverse impact on an existing centre or existing uses. In this case, really, as Emily said, it's just a commercial risk between two proponents that are wanting to create two service stations 36 metres apart. Unusual, but not part of an economic needs assessment because it's not a planning scheme matter that two proponents want to deliver service stations so close together. So that's why we didn't pursue an economic needs.
And so just in relation to a potential condition that says that the approval is still subject to that needs assessment being undertaken, what would you say just in relation to informing the committee about that sort of condition?
Yeah, through you, Mr Chair, we wouldn't consider that to be reasonable nor relevant. Particularly if we're actually looking at approving it, it would seem totally irrelevant and pointless to seek an economic needs assessment.
Okay, and so Emily, do you have a shot that just zooms out a little bit further into the nearby area? William?
Unfortunately, no, not in this, but it is
Councillor
in the
Jones probably
report.
knows where this is particularly, but where the Peachy garage is, yeah, I mean, look, this is clearly an area that's in some form of transition and, yeah, 191, yeah. You can see to the south there's a patch of the city that probably we wouldn't be as proud of in its presentation, but it's included as well. So, all right, any other questions, councillors? All right, well, I'm happy to move it with that change to include the extra pylon signage height limitation, seconded by Councillor Owen Jones. Yeah, I mean, how do we want to deal with that? I think with the fuel stations, most of the times, by the time they get to midnight, you've got a single operator who's probably operating through the console window rather than the full store. So I don't know how much,
So my concern,
how we would deal with it. But
yeah, so Mr Chairman, my concern is that you've got somebody maybe there half an hour to 45 minutes, after closing, the lights are still on and people driving by are going to pull in. Mm. And the fact that there's another servo 36 metres away running 24 hours a day, also with their lights on, to me would, again, induce people moving in, because this is the first servo on that northbound trip. So you've got people pulling in, car doors opening, car doors closing, potentially causing nuisance to people behind the back fence. So I would like to make sure that all activity ceases on site outside these hours and that the lights are turned off so that it's clear the servo is closed.
so why don't we just add an A Roman 2 or something that says that all staff, all activity on site, so including staff. Because I think it probably makes sense that the servo shop closes at midnight, for example. Like, you can get fuel up until midnight and then everyone will get used to that being the thing. Whereas if we said 11:45, it might be a bit problematic, but
Chair, just from my own experience of pulling into a service station that was actually closed, I think there's a safety issue with lighting as well for the operator. And you're right, there's usually only one sole operator there at that time. And I mean, I realised that it was closed. I had to actually walk up to the door, and he said, and I said, but all your lights are on. He said, well, that's because I'm here by myself and I can't turn the lights off until I leave. So
how long after the closure was that? Just
well, it closed. I must have been there probably only 10 minutes after midnight, and he still had his lights on. He was doing what he needed to do, you know, in doing money or doing, you know, reports or whatever. But he said he wasn't allowed to turn off the lights. And now I'm talking about, you know, where the Bowsers are. He wasn't turning off those lights until he actually left the premises, and that was a you know, a safety thing for him.
Yeah. So should we rework that condition, Roger? The one that's there, like A. 12:15.
Sorry.
12:15 a.m. a.m. Yeah, all right. Let's try this with when we can work this out between now and full council anyway. So all activity on site, including staff departure, must occur by 12:15 a.m.
So, Mr Chairman, I mean, I can't support that, because what that does is grant them extra time to be on site, inducing traffic.
Okay.
To my mind, what I want to support is a deadline.
Okay, well then, if that's the case, then let's rework A completely to say that the service station and all users must cease or must operate from 5 a.m. and cease all activity at midnight.
Yeah. And then that way, what would likely happen is they'll make a business decision to permit their staff to arrive at 5 a.m.
and delete that.
But maybe begin pumping fuel at 6 a.m. The other thing I think we might wish to do, Mr Chairman, with regard to that sign, which you want to lower the height of, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is to actually have that sign indicate the operating hours of the service station. I think that's sensible.
Maximum height of the pylon sign. Okay.
So that people aren't, again, driving in there unnecessarily. It's clear to those driving by that this is closed.
Yeah. Okay, well, do we want to add that to that signage condition?
If you're comfortable, Mr Chair.
Yeah. The maximum height of the pylon sign, blah, 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 and should include information relating, and must include information relating to the operating hours of the businesses.
At a reasonable size.
Yeah, not less than 10 point. 32. Okay, that'll do it for now. Okay, all right. Anyone else want to make a contribution? You happy with that, Councillor Jones? Adopted into the motion. All right, we'll take the vote on that. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, 6.3.
One station onto another time.
Sets up small consultancy firm.
Good morning, councillors. Through the chair, my name is Troy Kaler, Acting Coordinator Urban Planning, along with Acting Senior Planner Rosalind Calvert from the Neighbourhood Framework team. For today's presentation, we are reporting back on community engagement outcomes informing the finalisation of the concept plans for the Knobby Beach and Miami North and the Christian Avenue and 2nd Avenue station neighbourhoods for the community's consideration. Our most recent community engagement step involved a tailored stakeholder survey on the draft concept plans previously presented to Council, where we invited those of the approximately 1,800 respondents from the whole of city survey in June of last year that wanted to be informed of project updates and future opportunities for engagement. This provides broader community input alongside the initial draft concept plan feedback that the Community Reference Group, or CRG members, provided at the conclusion of the CRG meeting process in February of this year. Overall, multiple community engagement points have been undertaken involving different engagement types as shown in the diagram behind me. The concept plans are intended to guide future city plan changes moving into the statutory amendment process that will involve further engagement opportunities on any proposed changes. The questions for feedback on the draft concept plans were the same for the CRG members and the tailored stakeholders. While the questions focus on the draft concept plans directly in terms of what their favourite features or areas to improve, the questions also provided an opportunity to provide any additional thoughts or comments. As an overview of the survey response, firstly on the left, 22 members across both CRGs provided initial feedback from those attending the final meeting. Feedback was invited following a presentation on draft concept plan snapshots. At this meeting, with forms provided to complete and submit anonymously or return via email if more time was needed. On the right, through the tailored engagement feedback, 1,560 people were engaged, including whole of city survey respondents or the CRG members, and as well as community group and industry representatives previously engaged. This involved an email invitation to all stakeholders to provide feedback during the survey period with a link to the survey and access to the draft concept plans. Of that, approximately 500 people viewed the draft concept plans, with one or the other downloaded almost equally. 202 people continued with the survey by selecting a draft concept plan to provide feedback on, or both, and view the survey questions. However, 89 stakeholders proceeded to provide their responses to the survey questions. And lastly, as shown on screen, 7 members across both CRGs provided feedback through this re-engagement, noting that this tailored engagement step provided an opportunity to review the draft concept plans in more detail compared to the previous draft snapshots provided and was used for their initial feedback. The survey also included a question on the suburbs that they lived in. We can identify that 80% of those respondents live within the Frameworks corridor suburbs, so from Mermaid Beach to Burleigh Heads and to the western extent, Mermaid Waters through to Burleigh Waters. This diagram shows a significant interest of respondents that live in suburbs relevant to each station neighbourhood area, whereas feedback on both concept plans included more respondents from citywide suburbs. A petition relating to the Knobby Beach and Miami North Station Neighbourhood Concept Plan was received by Council in May of this year and was resolved to be reported back as part of today's agenda report and presentation. The Chief Petitioner is a tailored stakeholder with the petition support from 112 signatories and completed during the survey period. 74% of signatories are located in corridor suburbs, and we can identify 21% of those are actually located within that station neighbourhood area. The petition rejects the CRG findings and is unsupportive of the proposed height outcomes and calls for community involvement in the preparation of a neighbourhood plan to properly reflect community desires on various aspects. However, the finalisation of the concept plans will ultimately inform future city plan changes and bring together outcomes worked on with regard to community input in terms of building height and their desires on how they want their neighbourhoods to look into the future. The bringing together of engagement activities continues to be a focus for the process to finalise the concept plans as we move on to the next slide.
Yes.
So when you say it's a tailored engagement stakeholder, does that mean that somebody has paid to employ a professional, or what is a tailored engagement stakeholder?
A tailored stakeholder are those who took part in the citywide survey in June of last year. So the survey that was done citywide that informed the finalisation of the neighbourhood framework, they're identified as tailored stakeholders for the purpose of this re-engagement step.
Okay. Still doesn't help me.
Yeah, so essentially what happened is about 1,500 of those 1,800 survey respondents asked that they'd be willing to be followed up or continue to be involved in the process going forward. So what we've done is actually reached out to those 1,500 approximate stakeholders who said they would like to be followed up and said, here's the draft concept plans, do you have any comments? So the Chief Petitioner was one of those survey respondents. It's not necessarily that the signatories to the survey, to the petition were tailored stakeholders as such.
So maybe offline you could tell me who the Chief Petitioner is, because that might help.
Because the petition's been received by council.
So you can tell Councillor Jones if
Yeah, I think it was Mr. Sargent.
someone's sergeant. Oh, Boyd Sergeant. Right, lovely.
And through the chair, just further to that question, whilst the Chief Petitioner was a tailored stakeholder, there were also an additional 5 signatories from that petition who were also invited as a tailored stakeholder to be part of the survey and provide feedback.
Yeah. So I've heard all of that, and to me, what I've heard is that the tailored engagement stakeholder is a professional town planner with an opinion, and there's 112 people that have agreed with him.
Correct.
Thank you. Well, but that's what it is.
Yeah, no, I didn't know.
It's professional, so this is...
Glad you asked the question.
Speaks at all the neighbourhood watch meetings about what he doesn't support.
And that's fine. Like, I mean,
Which
but
is
I suppose
fine,
it helps to know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure when it comes time to making other city plan amendments, other town planning consultancies might seek meetings with city officers or make submissions in this process. I think this is the first time I've seen a town planner use a petition in order to compel effectively a bespoke report through council. Would that be correct? Or is this quite usual?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Forster, we would get submissions from a broad range of representatives across the city, but I mean, this is...
But for a town planner to use a petition and a local law?
We haven't done it this way before either, so I think it is, it's certainly not something we see often.
Yeah, thank you.
All that I can recall.
But from what Councillor Pauline Young's just said, if he attends neighbourhood watch meetings, my guess is that he's a local resident. Responding as a local resident is permitted to. So...
The line of questioning was that it was a commercial thing. Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, withdraw completely.
No, you don't.
Judge Caldwell accepted your withdrawal.
Thank you. So we're just getting back to the process of finalising the concept plans. So as you can see on the screen, we worked through the main ideas and key considerations from the CRG and the tailored stakeholders. on what was favoured or what could be improved, to identify the main areas of interest across the concept plans and examine against all the inputs to date. So that's all the engagement activities done so far, the whole of city survey results, as well as enabled framework vision and principles. This enabled key changes from this engagement to finalise the concept plans as represented on this slide. There were three main areas of interest across the two surveys that resulted in key changes, and full detail to the summary shown is on page 289 of the agenda report. This includes improved mapping and a new implementation action to communicate community desires for public realm improvements, for people-focused environments to support the station neighbourhood vision, new information and visual illustrations, as well as mapping refinements to communicate how building height, land use and design work together to achieve future outcomes within our growing neighbourhoods. This includes varying built form, housing mix and employment design priorities to be achieved. And lastly, new information on engagement in bringing together various inputs for greater project understanding has been added. While the CRG process is not the only input, it is also important to ask how the CRG members thought of the engagement process. An anonymous survey invited feedback after the completion of the CRG process and identified a high level of satisfaction with the engagement process, with this reflected in the level of agreement that the CRG members provided an opportunity for them to share their views and ideas on the planning of their future neighbourhoods. Most agreed that the process included useful and enjoyable activities and presentations, and feedback was appropriately recorded and reported back, for example, in the meeting summaries provided for their review and made available on the Neighbourhood Framework webpage. And overall, the process was rated as satisfactory through to very good. As a new engagement process for city planning, it was important to ask our CRG members what worked well and what could improve. The feedback shows, as on the left, that the city was as engaged and supportive of this engagement process for meaningful and respectful conversations, while ideas on what could improve, as on the right, only helps the city to build upon and value add to similar engagement activities in future. The finalised concept plans for this committee's consideration are included in attachment 3 and 4 of the agenda report. This incorporates the key changes, including a few adjustments to building heights across both concept plans to ensure appropriate transitions and built form variation, as well as east-west visual illustrations of the neighbourhood on how development will evolve between new and existing buildings, noting that not areas will be built out and that the development outcomes will be distinctly different than other locations in the city, such as Broadbeach and Surfers Paradise. These visual illustrations also reflect the mix of housing expected in varying built forms and how it has regard to the important design outcomes represented the community desires for the future. The recommendation for committee's considerations on page 295 of the agenda, as shown on screen shortly, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Petitioner.
Chairman, do you mind if I ask, what is the direct response then to the petition? Because that's seemingly, to me, been created with good intent and supported by a strong body of local residents, and it's requesting some particular actions. Thanks.
Through the chair. So I guess there were two components to the petition that were quite, I guess, of interest to the concept planning work and also our statutory planning work that we're taking forward, provided council endorses this today. The first component was, I guess, just a flat out not supporting the concept plan and the building heights. So we've been through a very thorough process with not only the survey at the very beginning, but also with the CRGs to prepare those draft concept plans. So it's very difficult to sort of, when you've got detailed plans put out for community consultation, not to have actually had any specific detail, just a general lack of support for the concept plans. And then the subsequent component was to actually request that a neighbourhood plan be prepared. And as you know, in a statutory planning sense, we don't have local area plans in our city plan. Certainly from our point of view, we've done a very thorough body of work around the concept plans, and we've seen that to the end and brought them forward today. So the decision of council, if that's made today to support the concept plans, we'd advise the petitioners that the concept plans have been finalised and that a future statutory amendment will be undertaken to reflect those concept plans into a city plan using the tools available in city plan to do that. So you won't necessarily see a neighbourhood plan as such, but like targeted growth, there's certain components in our future amendment that actually talk to neighbourhood characteristics. And so whether or not we can reflect those through overlays or other components of city plan, we'd use the tools we have available to reflect the concept plans into city plan.
So, I mean, the weird thing is this really is a neighbourhood planning exercise that we've been through. So the petition is kind of calling for exactly what we've done, and how ultimately that gets put into city plan. It's less about what it's called, it's more about this process that's been undertaken, which is doing the very thing that the petition has called for, albeit that they've said, oh no, we don't like that version of your neighbourhood planning, we want a different version of neighbourhood planning. So,
So they asked for the concept plan to be rejected altogether.
Which is basically saying.
And to not support the proposed height outcome. So what's the outcome in regard to the heights? Has this influenced, or has there been a modification of the proposed heights as a result of the consultation process?
Yes, there has. Yep.
Sure, do you mean?
Yes, even just through this round. So with the CRGs, we did a lot of work around looking at each of these station neighbourhoods and working with what the survey respondents had advised us, which was concentrate uplift around stations and along major transport corridors. So we worked with the CRGs around, okay, what level of uplift could be considered? And that's where generally the highest uplift that we looked at was sort of that generally 8 to 10 stories was the max. And then it tapered down, and it generally tapered down more to the west. We didn't have a lot of uplift to the east of the highway. So working with the...
You when it came to council previously? As in recently, or did you miss that round?
Yeah.
No, it was here, Chairman. Yeah.
Okay.
I recall all of that. I just wanted to be transparent about the process.
Well, I think since that version, I think it's probably fair to say there's been refinements, but not wholesale change in the latter part of this process.
So each station neighbourhood, and reflecting the comments that we received through this tailored engagement activity, there have been some modifications to the building heights for each of the station neighbourhoods. So I don't know, Troy, if you've got that on the slide, but effectively for the Miami North and Miami North and Knobby Beach station neighbourhood, the change was mainly in the western area, and that was to have a better transition. So it was a reduction in height for one component, and then also for so that area that's highlighted, you can see there on the screen.
Thank you.
So that was 21 metres, I think, previously. So it's been brought down a little bit to 18 to get a better transition. And then for the Christine Ave to Second Ave station neighbourhood, those areas highlighted as well have had a change. So there was concern just about the transition along the Gold Coast Highway. So we had them up a bit higher, and so they've been tapered down as you get further away from the station. And people were concerned about a bit of a canyon effect along the highway there.
Yeah.
So that's where changes have been made to the building heights as an outcome of the tailored engagement.
So when, if you don't mind, Chairman, when they say that they rejected the height outcomes, was it specific or was it just blanket?
No, it was broad and blanket. So it's very hard to then, when we're working through a concept exercise, to actually go, okay, well, which bit are they talking about? It's actually the whole thing.
Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Just Were you coming to me then? Sorry,
No.
I was listening.
We'll give it to the moving stage.
Oh, okay.
I've moved it.
And I'm
I was
happy
looking
to
for a seconder.
Yeah, most definitely happy to second it.
Seconded.
Seconded, yeah.
Councillor Pauline Young,
and
yes.
Can I speak to it, please, Chair?
Yes, you can speak to it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please.
So, and for all of my colleagues in the room and for those people who are watching in, so I went through the whole process on both CRGs on this and attended every session. And not only is it the people who took part in the sessions, they actually very much dispersed the information amongst the local community. So it's not just a very limited group or those people who were originally provided feedback, the 1,800 and then down to the 1,560 that wanted to be included following the process, is that it has definitely been fed out within the community. There's been a lot of discussion about it, but the things that became most apparent during the whole procedure was that people understand, majority of people do understand that we are a growing city and that there's a lot more people coming to the city, and that they were prepared to work through that process with ensuring that we get the better outcomes along those transport corridors where they're looking for wider footpaths, greener corridors, amenities that actually support people moving around actively towards our stations or towards our bus stations and that. So in being part of all of those groups, and it was done very well in the fact that each time there was a particular activity to undertake, you weren't sitting with the same people each time. So the groups were mixed up every single time, so everybody's opinion was taken into consideration. Majority of people challenged each other going through them as to why this should be happening. There was business people, there was local residents, there was new people to our city, there was long-term people to our city. So in the 6+ years that I've been a councillor, to participate in this particular community engagement, I believe is one of the best that I've actually been involved in. So because we actually got good, honest dialogue from people who are well respected within the community. And yes, there will always be people that don't support what's happening, and I believe the process is, as our chair has indicated, is basically going to give them that. The next direction is almost like a neighbourhood plan without actually calling it that, and people have been able to feed into where they think the future of the actual identified corridor at the moment where we're doing these CRGCs will end up going forward. So I think when it comes to planning our city and planning that corridor well, then this is a great place to benchmark back to, and we do know that then these plans, if approved through us, will then go out for further community consultation going forward. So it's not, some people interpreted it that once they came out of that group, the results came out of that, that was just the change to the city plan, but there's definitely more stages to be followed through with, and the officers have gone over and above, spending so many officers in the room at the time. We had state representatives in the room at every session as well. So it's probably one of the most thorough consultations and inclusion of our residents and their thoughts going forward as to how we're best going to manage the growth in our city, but also support those people who are either just moving here or have lived here long term. So I'd have to say thank you to all the officers and the director and that for how this is, and Richard, who's done an awesome job, and all of his team guiding people through this. And we are going to get people that don't necessarily support the outcomes, but if it's an outcome that gives us a broad overview, I think we're working well with our residents within the city. So again, thank you and well done to everyone. Thanks.
In favour? Against? Carried. (6.4). Councillor Vorster.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Through you to the Director, it's not a complex question, but I think it's really important to get it on the public record. So our LGIP 2 is our plan to deliver infrastructure to meet the growth that we anticipate to unfold across the city in specific areas, right? Could I just seek from you, against which scheme is the LGIP 2 bin prepared?
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Vorster. So it's under the current scheme, I think version 8, is that, are we up to 8? Yep. It is not, if we look at Amendment 2 and 3, for example, LGIP 2 is not prepared on that, but what we would look to do if that changed in the future, we would then update the LGIP.
So, just for those who tuned in, the city is making its best attempt at delivering an infrastructure plan to meet the demands on our infrastructure driven by population growth, but there's a statutory requirement to prepare that plan against the prevailing planning instrument, which for us is the city plan, and that our hands are effectively tied to update this infrastructure plan if there is any delay in the progression of future amendments to this plan, which could include, as we've had, the Spit Master Plan was thrown into the mix, or when the state land on a position with the Olympic Games Village at Robina. Our hands are effectively tied until we've got an endorsed planning instrument. Is that correct? My only question. I'm happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Vorster, second by Councillor Petty-Young. Any further comments? We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Any items of general business? No meeting. Are there any items of general business, councillors?
Chair, I was just wondering if we could get an update from the Director as to where we are with Amendments 2 and 3 coming back from the state,
Talk about that,
please.
yeah, in a second. Any items of general business? Yes.
General business item?
Well, I'll hear it first before I rule.
Well, let's get, let me ideate here, that a report be brought forward. Yeah, if you can, just so we can. No, because, I think that's an offence. That's an offence under the Local Government Act. Yes. That a report be brought forward.
Is it frozen? No?
No. Title. That a report be brought forward contemplating any reasonable conditions of approval which may be attached to future medium and high density developments to support the provision of charging facilities for electric vehicles.
Mick, I know you've tried to run away because of last night's result, but do you want to just pop back in for a sec?
What happened last night?
22-12, I think, just from memory.
Just in the mick of time. Nice try.
So, look, it's probably very relevant that we, broadly speaking, are contemplating the role of electric vehicles and the way they are in the city. There's probably some fundamental issues around the rules of engagement, if I can put it that way, about what we can condition and the basis upon which we do it. The first limb of which is about it being for a lawful planning purpose. So, you want to just talk us through this, Mick, as to...
Yeah, through Mr. Chair. So The Chair's correct in that the conditions actually have to be for, I guess, a planning purpose, and what we often say and what the courts often say is it has to be reasonable and relevant. In my opinion, if the city was to put a condition on requiring this, it would not be either reasonable or relevant, because there's no requirement for that medium or high-rise development to have the charging station to operate as intended. It's not relevant because there's no requirement under our city plan or sort of other policy that would necessitate it. So while we could put the conditions on, I don't think it would stand up if challenged.
Mr. Chairman, I fully accept the this pearl of wisdom that's been offered up by Mr. Moran. And to his point, my general business item talks of reasonable conditions of approval. And it could be that the report suggests that there are no reasonable conditions of approval. But I think we're in this difficult position today. I mean, today we considered an approval for a service station. In 10, 15 or 20 years' time, it's going to be absolutely absurd for a future local government to be contemplating additional service stations delivering hydrocarbons through a nozzle, right? We already know vehicle manufacturers are moving to fully electric, whether it's Daimler Chrysler, Tesla already doing it, Volvo are moving to it. So I see this problem on the horizon where we are granting approvals for buildings that are, will have a design life of 50 to 75, maybe 100 years with car parking. But if they're not providing the sufficient electrical capacity to these buildings or charging infrastructure in the basements, then I wonder whether in 15, 20 or 30 years, we're actually going to be delivering sustainable car parking, because those vehicles may need to be parked elsewhere where they can actually be charged.
What we're probably better off to do, Councillor Vorster, is just take a broader policy approach.
Could we possibly say that a report be brought forward contemplating potential changes to the planning scheme and any reasonable conditions of approval which may be attached? Because the state government is miles behind progressing planning scheme changes.
I see what you did. So we need to build a Bailey Bridge.
What I don't want to do is maybe forego the opportunity to come up with a set of reasonable conditions, which applicants may choose to accept because the market's moving in that direction, but we can present to them pro forma conditions that can be built in, right? So I don't want to miss the opportunity to get some good green outcomes for our precious earth today, merely because the state government is miles behind working with us on the city plan changes.
Commercial?
Well, for me, that was contemplated, but yeah, attached to future commercial, medium and high density developments.
Well, commercial,
comma,
and
medium,
commercial, comma, medium and high density residential developments. Is that what you mean?
No, I meant any commercial.
You're talking about something that
any commercial development or any medium density or high density development. Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Could we just perhaps just say development, because there'll be a range of development types that might have it, and we're not conditioning it at the moment yet. We're seeing some proponents actually include it because that's what their future buyers want.
Let's standardise it.
Pack Fair's got them included. Other places have them included. So it might be
future developments then.
Yep.
Look at this, huh? Organisation, representation, fused together. It's good. I'd like to get this carried, Councillor Young. You and I both care for this precious planet. Nice try.
So Mr. Moran's just quoted Mr. Johns from last night about what he's got to do for the next 12 months. So to me, I think we started looking quite specifically about conditions, and that's maybe problematic. To me, it might be actually how we can help influence the state in the advocacy part of it. So I think the state government acknowledges on the Gold Coast in particular that there's some issues around affordable housing and delivery of that missing middle. And I think that having good outcomes like this as part of the design process might be something that the state should be interested in, whether or not it's through their state planning policy. I don't know if they've got a specific planning policy yet regarding electric vehicles, but they need to be looking, like, I mean, it's okay to do the electric highway and put in a couple of charging stations because that gets some good social media. But I think this is actually about how you can change the way people do things in urban environments.
So, Mr. Chairman, perhaps we add an A to that, that the Chief Executive Officer, right?
Why don't we let that report come through?
Well,
it may be the case that what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is to
signal to the responsible minister that we've identified this as an opportunity, and we urge them to effectively pay attention to our process and seek our guidance around any state policy that they may be developing. No?
Why don't we just wait? Because then we can write to them and say, look, this is what we see as the way forward. I don't know.
We can address any potential if we look at that. It won't just be city plan or conditions. There might be other policies.
Right. Well, they might read this on social media because I understand the Premier likes it when people look at social media.
No one's touching that. Why not? All right, councillors, so moved an excellent general business item from Councillor Vorster, moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Peter Young. The Green Sheriff.
Yes. Yes. So instead of being teals, we're emeralds, right?
If ever there was a pair of tree huggers, there they are. All right, moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor.
You combined have planted as many trees as Mark has.
Yeah, but strawberries are not trees.
They're a low shrub.
They plant themselves with them runners.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Classic.
All right. Happy with that?
Yeah, very happy.
All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, councillors, we'll close the meeting at 10:31. You can just turn the streaming off.